Hello and welcome to our presentation. I'm Caroline Yates, Head of International Projects and Relations at Mayhew in the UK, and my co-speaker is Dr. Metskhvarishvili, our head vet with Mayhew, Georgia. So what the presentation will cover, I'll do a little bit of a brief background about Georgia, why we're in Georgia, and then we'll be focusing on our relationship with two of the major stakeholders, the national and local government and the veterinary sector. So why Georgia? We've been working in Georgia for just over 10 years now, and we registered as an NGO in July 2018 there, following a feasibility study of all three Caucasus countries. There is no other international NGO in the small animal welfare field working in Georgia other than Mayhew. We work closely with the local authorities and the national authorities, and also with the veterinary training establishments where possible. Just to say the way we work, our approach to working with the stakeholders is that they need to be involved, particularly the local and national government, because without them being involved, there is a risk that there will be no sustainability or long-term impact for the work that we do. And we also know that animal welfare is a very emotive subject, particularly so sometimes in Georgia. But in all our work, our approach is to be evidence-based, non-partisan and apolitical, and we try and find constructive ways of working with all parties. So a little bit of background. We were first approached by Tbilisi City Council at the end of 2013. They wanted to introduce a dog population management program in the city, which we thought was great, excellent. And they asked us to come and visit and help. At that time, just to explain that dog population management in Georgia was then and still is the responsibility of the local government, not the national government. There was then, and there still is not now, any minimum standards for shelters, be they municipal or privately run shelters. And at that time, there was no relevant legislation on pet ownership, trading in pets or breeding, and more about that a little later. So what did we find after our first visits? No real infrastructure, no baseline data on how they were going to approach the dog issue in Tbilisi. Unfortunately, the shelter facilities were very poor, and there weren't very many personnel sufficiently qualified in veterinary surgery, small animal veterinary surgery or animal care within the shelter environment. And there are also very poor relations between the authorities and the local animal welfare activists. So what was our approach? Our approach was to have biannual visits between 2014 and 2018 to the municipal shelter, providing them primarily with vet training so that they could deliver the spaying and neutering program, and step-by-step recommendations to improve the facilities and management of the shelter and the programs they were running. And we also tried to help with community engagement initiatives to improve relations with the local population. So between those 4 years, 2014 and 2018, we made quite good strides. We made considerable improvements to the shelter facilities, a few of which are listed here on the screen. We also improved the conditions of the clinic at the shelter, which was very much in need of some basic equipment and protocols. After 4 years, there was a veterinary team competent in reproductive surgery and vet assistants competent in pre- and post-operative care. And during that time, Tbilisi City Council created an agency called Animals Monitoring Agency, which is a good thing. However, one downside is that they have to respond to all animal-related matters, not just dogs or cats, so they are somewhat overstretched with what they can deliver. And at the same time, they brought in bylaws for Tbilisi only on microchipping and registering ownership and guardianship of dogs. The challenges during that time, and there were challenges and there still remain challenges, was consistency in delivering the improvements that we had brought about with them, because once we were not there, there was a tendency to fall back into old customs and habits. There is a problem with staff turnover at the municipal shelter, quite low morale and limited motivation from the team in what they are actually doing. And as I mentioned, there was quite fraught relations with local welfare activists who regarded the authorities as, evil personified, and they couldn't do anything right. But, progress was being made and we were well on our way by 2018. But at that time, there was local elections in Tbilisi and there was a change of local government. And as is the way there, that sometimes when there's change in power structure, people who were working for the previous government were dismissed and they brought their own people in, which is what happened at the municipal shelter. And then that was compounded by COVID coming in not so long after that. So unfortunately, we did lose a little bit of our work and impact over between 2019 and 2021. However, we're now really back on track, and the last 2 years have been very proactive in Georgia. Mayhew, Georgia itself has opened the first solely not-for-profit clinic in Tbilisi. We have good collaborative relations with Animals Monitoring Agency and the municipal shelter. We are sharing a TB&R program in the city using their dog catchers and vehicles, and they're bringing dogs to our clinic for neutering and vaccination. We finally got them to agree to do a comprehensive dog survey in 2023, and so we now have the baseline data to help them develop a longer-term strategy for dog population management. And there has been headway made in relations with local activist groups. And also they have admitted that they need help in other areas, such as dog behaviour and assessment of dogs in the shelter, which we are now helping them to look at. At the same time, we've started working with other international non-government agencies. So there is now talk about developing minimum standards for shelters with FAO of the United Nations. And on legislation, we were part of a working group, a parliamentary working group last year to develop a draft law on pet ownership and breeding, which, as far as I understand, is still draft. It's not perfect in our eyes, but it's a step forward. So what are the remaining challenges? And there still are remaining challenges. There are still issues with standards at the shelter. We still don't have the minimum standards in place, but hopefully that will be worked on over the next 18 months. There's still an issue with staff turnover and motivation, unfortunately, and I would say that that's the most challenging aspect for the authorities at the moment. The dog dynamics have changed at the shelter because most of the roaming dogs are released back onto the street. So the dogs in the shelter are abandoned, lost and abandoned, owned ones. And we're now seeing lots of pit bull types, Dobermans, large breeds that cannot be left on the street and also don't do well in the shelter environment. And there are still inconsistencies in delivering the dog population management programme simply because of the resources, both from the authorities' side and from our side. Outside of Tbilisi, there is also a large problem. Outside of Tbilisi, it's very hard to find any small animal veterinary provision at all. The government have decided that they should build large regional shelters as hubs for those areas. But again, they've built a structure, but there's nobody to run or manage it properly. And there's a lack of interest from the municipalities because they don't necessarily think that animal welfare is a priority. We do work with some, and it's quite a bureaucratic process. The tender process for providing any services for the government is very bureaucratic. It's quite uses outdated criteria, and unfortunately, whoever offers the lowest price for their service wins. So there's no thought about the value of the veterinary work or the quality that is delivered. But there are some advantages of working in the regions and the achievements. We can be rather more flexible. We're working in smaller towns and villages, so there's fewer dogs to deal with, which means that we can carry out pre and post surveys in a shorter space of time, and we can deliver blitz with mobile and pop-up clinics in those regions over a period of days rather than weeks. And there is as well more interest from some municipalities in addressing the issues about the roaming dogs in their communities. Anna was recently in Guria in Ozorgeti, where there was discussions with other civil society groups, not only animal welfare groups, about how to deal with the roaming dog issue. And this was because the residents in the Guria region had voted dogs as one of the top 3 concerns for their communities. We have a very successful program ongoing at the moment in Dusheti. We have a very supportive mayor, a lady, and she is using the model of our work in Dusheti in her discussions with other regional governors and mayors about how to address the dog population issues in the regions. So now we'll talk about the veterinary sector, and I'll hand over to our head vet of Mayhew, Georgia, Dr. Anna Metskhvarishvili. Thank you.
We could already go to the next slide because I'm gonna be when you say that.
Okay.
Sorry. So thank you, Caroline. So what I'm going to be talking about is, first of all, before I start, back in the days when I was becoming a student, I would want to underline that becoming a vet was not very popular position because it was not respected. And most of the vets were considered as a farm animal vets, and small animal veterinary services were mostly not existent. So in Georgia right now, what we're dealing with on a bigger scale is we don't have the licensing system for the vets or vet techs, which means that when we finish the university, there's no exam to take that would license us. And then usually if there was somebody practicing off the practice for a long time and would want to come back to practice, still no control of it. And I think that's quite risky in some moments. And we don't have any requirements for the CPD, which leads us to having really low standards and really low veterinary morale, as it's not necessary from the government side. Another big issue that we're usually dealing with is we do not have access to quite a lot of drugs. So one of them being opioids group. We only have access to some of the controlled drugs like ketamine and diazepam, and usually it's on the more advanced procedures, it's more difficult to do just on those. In general, there's quite a lot of outdated methods and beliefs that are out there in society or veterinary medicine that Georgia has to deal with all the time. But I think during this time, there has been in the last 10 years quite a lot of progress. And we will be talking about that as well. So that was more on the Georgian side, and now I'm going to be talking about the university side. And when I entered the university, the situation was so that the educational textbooks that we had were mostly from Soviet times. So that means it was really, really outdated, even some funny things that we learned there. And the veterinary curriculum on its own did not have anything in small animal veterinary medicine. Yeah. And the division between veterinary medicine and vet techs and vet nurses is also very poor. We generally did not have an educational system specifically for vet nurses, so that has been very challenging in general as well. Then if you managed to get yourself an education at the university or tech quality, then you would want to do some CPD and actually get your hands-on practice. But there's a big lack of that as there's no CPD requirements. So as a graduate student, you would depend on the qualifications and of the clinic that would accept you. And as a young vet who does not know much of what things, how they should be done, it's very hard to judge if you're at a good place or not. So, and then when it comes to the clinics, the very common issues that we deal with is not really anybody used to be at least concerned about asepsis. Nowadays, it's more that they use sterile gloves, but still not care of how sterile they would stay during the surgery. And there's lack of autoclaves and instruments being sterilized. Not really big pain management. First, that we don't have opioids, but again, during the surgery, there's not much monitoring done of the surgeries and how well a sleep animal is. And we have a huge list of beliefs around neutering and vaccination, like, for example, the dogs should not be vaccinated for the rabies until they are 6 months old. Because they would be delayed in the growth, and then about neutering, most of the vets believe that neutering should be done only after the dog has given birth at least once in their lifetime. So lots of things to deal with like that. And when it comes to the field work that Caroline talked about, there's usually a lot of people who think that TVNR programs specifically cannot be done how we are doing because they think it's not possible to do surgery, vaccination, and parasite control in one day, and they think it's too much for the animal. Another big issue that we have of antibiotics in Georgia in general, in human medicine also, there is no system of writing prescriptions, so you could just get it in the pharmacy. And then, of course, veterinary medicine is even in a bit worse situation because lack of diagnostic systems and lack of funds from the poor owners leads to usage of wide range of antibiotics. That means we're not really on a good scale of how to deal with the global problem that has microbial resistance. And then the changes that we've been making, basically, I would say that all of these issues that we've talked about, we are really trying to address. And for the past year, we have actually moved our clinic to the university premises. And we have started working very closely with the university curriculums, developing them and giving them CPD trainings. I think in Georgia, we used to have, as I said, it was not very respected position. But nowadays, I think people are happier and vets are more proud of their profession. And we are really trying to make the students understand that it's a very good profession. Right now, you also see in the picture some vet techs doing the training with us. And we have become our training has become the part of veterinary curriculum that we really worked on. And I think it's going to be a very nice thing for the students because we might not be able to go in every clinic specifically, but if they see very high standard clinics right from the very beginning, and that is possible to do in Georgia, whenever they're out for different clinics to work in, hopefully they will try to create the environments like that for themselves. So yes, thank you for listening. But have we made the progress? I think over the last 10 years, with the last fact that I mentioned also, I think we have been making huge progress. And I would like to underline that everything that I wanted to have as a student and took me a long time to get to, right now we have created the situation where the students can get that kind of understanding and knowledge in a much shorter time that I did with the help of Mayhew. And I think that's really amazing and changing. Plus, on the plus side, we are picking up the speed of developing, and hopefully we're going to have a wider changes.
And I just say, wonder if our approach is the right one. I think we've been in Georgia 10 years, and what have we done? But I think we have come a long way in Georgia. There's still a long way to go. It can be incredibly frustrating at times, but we have a fantastic team in Georgia, and importantly, they are all Georgians, and they are becoming the trainers of other Georgians, and that is what will make sustainability. So thank you.